What's up, man? We've got Jeremy Ryan over here, man, referred to by conservatives as SEGWay Boy, is an American protester and NFT artist. In 2011, he was called the face of the Wisconsin Capitol protests, which included the Capitol occupation, the movement that some claim inspired the Occupy movement. He is also known widely under his trade name of NFT Demon. Wow, that's like a good intro. That's a good intro, man. Tell me a little bit just about that before we get into anything more, man.
Yeah, so I mean, most of that covers my start. It makes a little bit of mention of like my current endeavors, but most of that covers the start of my public profile, which was which predated my involvement in crypto or Bitcoin or NFTs or any of that type of stuff. And it started as political. A lot of people like to try to conflate the fact that I started my history fighting Scott Walker, who was a Republican governor, as me being a Democrat, but that's just not the case. Both parties hated me once they realized they couldn't control me. When it came to Act 10, what Act 10 was, it was a bill, and this is what started and my entire like political career, I guess, even though I wasn't getting paid at the time. But what Act 10 was a bill ending collective bargaining. So it said that public workers could not bargain for benefits, could not bargain for conditions if they were in unions. So they couldn't actually like negotiate better conditions with the government than what they got. In my opinion, it didn't even have anything to do with the bill because by the time I really got involved, like the unions had like thousands of hundreds of thousands of people outside the Capitol and it became a big thing. So it didn't have anything to do with the bill. My issue was that they were trying to ram the bill through in 3 days. And it was a like 300-page bill. And they were doing that so that nobody had a chance to read the bill. And there was a bunch of other evil shit that was in the bill that like I severely disagreed with. And even most Republicans ended up disagreeing with it once they figured out what was actually all in there. But you know, it was what it was. But I really thought that it was wrong to sidestep the democratic process by trying to ram this major bill through that even the senators and assembly people who are voting for it can't read the whole thing by the time you actually push it through. And in my opinion, that tells me that you're guilty of trying to do something that the majority of people wouldn't want you to do if you're trying to ram it through that quick. And so that's where I started the Wisconsin Capitol occupation, and then later Occupy Wall Street, which in the beginning, Occupy Wall Street started as a good movement. Occupy Wall Street, it was later co-opted by the Democratic Party. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not saying it wasn't later co-opted by the Democratic Party. It was, but it started as a simple realization that the concentration of wealth in this country is getting uh, too large. And a good example to look at is Africa. Africa has a fuck ton of money. Like they have so many natural resources that they're like Africa is one of the highest GDP continents in the entire world, but they're one of the poorest because the wealth is so concentrated to so very few people. And so when we look at Africa as an example, we're moving closer towards that here in America because the wealth is being concentrated. And you have things like coronavirus that are created specifically to concentrate wealth even further and to the very few. And some people want to say that it's one group or another group or whatever. It's probably a combination of groups, and most of the people behind it probably nobody's ever going to know their names. These are like nameless, faceless people that can travel around wherever the fuck they want because they own the national banks across the world and all sorts of other shit. And so it ended up starting as we need to look at the concentration of wealth and how rapidly it's concentrating so that America doesn't become Africa, where we have so much resources, we're making so much money, but so much of our population has no money. And so it did start on a good premise. And that's where we started. And that's where I got my start, was the precursor to Occupy Wall Street. I also did help found Occupy Wall Street, but had it not been for the Wisconsin Capitol occupation, there wouldn't have been an Occupy Wall Street. And so I started the Wisconsin Capitol occupation under the premise that, like, shit's not going right. We need to actually do something more than just like march around the street, you know, but also not something that like damages property or hurts anybody. And so that became the median. You know, let's just occupy a building. Nobody's gonna get hurt. Nothing's gonna get damaged. I wasn't saying like let's start taking hammers and chisels and start like fucking like destroying the building or anything. You know, there was none of that. None of that even happened either. But even like the fringe crazies didn't show up and start doing that type of shit. Back then things were a lot more organized. Um, but um, but it started on the root of, we need to do something more than just like marching around where they're not able to see us and hear us, and we need to occupy the building that these people come to every day. You know, so let's set up beds, let's set up tents, let's just fucking take over their fucking building. You know, why the fuck not? And that was a very new concept back then. And that was the first time in the country that that concept had even been shown since the Vietnam War days. And the Vietnam War days, actually, still, even in Wisconsin, which was one of the hotbeds of the Vietnam War protests, but in Wisconsin, the Capitol was taken over before in the Vietnam War days. But there's not a single building that had been occupied since then, prior to to me restarting the Capitol occupation.